Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Mercedes have revealed big upgrades are in the works for the W14, reckoning they can get closer to the front every single race, especially in Melbourne, but also potentially get back into the championship fight, says Mike Elliott, the technical director at Mercedes, despite how dominant the Red Bull currently seems. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. First of all, big news on Porsche. There was a lot of rumours for some time that Porsche were going to join the grid. They were meant to partner up with Red Bull. That then fell through and no longer was happening. They then talked to McLaren. There were rumours they talked to actually Williams, and that seems to have fallen through as well. So I think Porsche wanted too much of a stake in Red Bull, or they wanted something from the kind of business ends that wasn't really working for Red Bull. So they decided, you know what, let's partner with Ford. That will effectively give Red Bull what they want from the relationship, and Porsche will not be partnering with anyone for the time being. They are still interested in Formula 1, but in the medium term, they are not going to be going anywhere. So for 2026, that's not going to be happening anymore as it was for some time. Also, big update for you guys wanted to mention here on the current race pace analysis by the team so far. This is the information from the last decade since the turbo hybrid era, comparing all the cars' race pace. Now, in qualifying, we know that often things can be a bit skewed compared to what actually delivers the points on the Sunday. Let's say last season and this season, Ferrari are far closer to Red Bull in pure qualifying performance than they are when it comes to dishing out the points on Sunday in the race itself. This is the data from Bahrain over the last decade. Mercedes had the massive advantage in 2014. There's always some caveats there though, because after the safety car, they had fresher tyres than the rest of the field. Red Bull was stuck further back. They did have a massive pace advantage, don't get me wrong, but it was about 1.1 seconds that race. But in Bahrain this year, Red Bull had a 0.7 second advantage with some conservation going on. However, when you factor in it the first two races, you then get a picture which starts to be a little bit more, diversified across all the Grand Prix. And Red Bull across the first two races of the season so far have the highest, so far, pace advantage over any team we have had in the last decade. As I say, there's always caveats here. Mercedes have had quite a lot of good cars, 2014, 2020 most certainly, but technically from the first two races, Red Bull have the best car on average so far. So Hamilton's point that the Red Bull RB19 is the fastest car he's ever seen compared to the competition might have more weight than it felt like it had at first, but we're going to have to see more data on this over time to really get a good picture of this, and Mercedes are intended to close this gap. But the funny thing is, this gap isn't to Mercedes, this gap is currently to Aston Martin, and Mercedes are looking at Aston Martin. They're of course looking at Red Bull to try and start their catch-up attempt. They made the call after Bahrain, this car isn't working, we've got to start making some changes, and as soon as they did that, according to themselves, they've made immediately much bigger gains than they've made in a long time. He could mean, I think Toto Wolff said this, he could mean from years ago really. This is the most strides they're taking behind the scenes in simulations, behind the scenes in the wind tunnel, that they've taken for some time. So they've changed tack and immediately they are reaping the benefits of it, but it takes time for such upgrades to arrive on the track, and whether the W14 can be fully solved is another question entirely, especially compared to where the Red Bull is. The Ferrari is nowhere near where they need to be. The Aston Martin is very competitive and hopefully they'll continue to be such, but Mercedes' short-term goal has got to be to catch and overtake Aston Martin, and George Russell believes they can do that. There's more performance in the locker, he says, in some races to come. I believe even James Vowles, formerly of Mercedes, now the team principal at Williams, said that the W14, from his understanding of being at the team until very recently, is going to be very good around certain circuits, such as Silverstone, such as Spain, I believe he said, are two that the W14 will be very competitive at. Other circuits maybe not so much. I believe that Mercedes think that in Melbourne, Albert Park coming up in a couple of weekends, they're going to be pretty good, just like they were in Jeddah. They took a step forward, especially compared to Ferrari, not really compared to Red Bull, but they made some strides in Jeddah with a couple of upgrades they brought, and there's more to come in Melbourne, but after that, any further upgrades will probably be developed on this new concept they're going for, which hopefully, for Mercedes, will give them a massive step in the right direction. So George Russell says, look, there's more performance in the locker here, there's way more to come from us over the season. The question is there any chance they can possibly get back into a battle? They need to be fighting for race wins from at least race 8, 9, 10 to have any hope in hell of making this happen, and it's probably not going to happen. But Mike Elliott, technical director, I'll share this clip here for you guys just now, mentions in the kind of race debrief they did, discusses how they went about the change of concept that they're currently undergoing, but also says they've got lots of things to come and they're confident they can have some upgrades down the line that will put them back in the championship championship fight. Seems to me it's going to be better late than never for Mercedes, but probably far too late to make anything happen this season. But still, they must be kind of confident in what they're producing behind the scenes right now, that potentially a championship fight could still be on.
I think after Bahrain, we had to accept we weren't where we wanted to be, that we had to look at all the things that make up our car and work out what could we be doing differently, how could we get more performance, because there's a significant gap for us to catch up to the front. So the engineers are busy looking at aerodynamics, they're looking at the shape of the car, things like the side pod geometry, the floor geometry, have we missed a trick? But we're also looking in the simulation world of, are we targeting the right things? Are we pushing the aerodynamics in the right direction? We're looking at the mechanical setup of the car. Are there things there that we're missing? What else can we bring to the car that's going to add performance? And we're trying to do that as fast as we possibly can, because we want to get back to the front. We want to be competing at the front. And actually walking around the factory, there's a huge amount of energy. There's a huge amount of work going on. We're starting to see some of the development come through already that's going to get us back into this championship fight. And all we can do is just keep pushing, and actually I've been really pleased to see the attitude in the team.
Of course, first though, they've got to beat Aston Martin before they can start thinking about trying to beat Red Bull, and one of the things they might be trying to address with these updates is Lewis Hamilton's frustration with the car. He did take positives away from the weekend. He says it's going to be up and down throughout the first 3 races. Hopefully we can get some upgrades through ASAP and close the gap to the Astons. That's the first step. But he also mentioned the rear end stability that he's not happy with at all. He says we're a long way down on downforce, so we've got to pick up the rear end's downforce particularly. The more rear we gain, the more stable the rear becomes, the more confident I will be able to attack. And it seems like this is where Hamilton is struggling with this car, maybe more so than Russell is. Russell's used to driving cars with not much downforce. Let's be honest, he drove the Williams for years. So, Hamilton is probably not so used to driving cars with weaker rear ends. And this is probably why he was, lacking a lot of confidence in qualifying, especially. He lost maybe 3.5 tenths to Russell alone in Sector 1 during qualifying because he just didn't have the confidence in the car. Part of that was probably setup related, but part of that apparently is just a straight up issue with the Mercedes W14 that is not suiting him. I think in general, just this car, there's a specific thing with something on the car that I've never had before. It's a position I've not had in previous years' cars. For me, it's the thing that's making me uncomfortable. I've just got to work hard to make sure it's changed. So he reckons there's something that he can't change himself. He just finds that part of the car uncomfortable and therefore it's got to go. And I think this is really to do with the rear stability, because he goes on to say it's a massive knife edge. It's on a knife edge, so the car can either crash out or lose control, or it's fantastic. But when you're above about 95%, he reckons when you're pushing hard, that's when he struggles with the rear stability. When you're in a race stint, it's going to be okay, right? Because you're not pushing 100% all the time, so it's more controllable, more predictable. So he's more confident in the race, but still doesn't have the full confidence. He's doing the best he can. Toto Wolff went on to say that they're trying to fix it, but it's not something that can be cured quickly. He says, I think it's the fact that with Hamilton, we have a fundamental issue he's not happy with, and that is linked to where he feels the rear end of the car is. That's not something that can be cured quickly, but the drivers are the important sensors, and that's who they're going to listen to, which of course makes sense. But it will be interesting to see how quickly Mercedes can solve this issue for Hamilton, and whether until then, Hamilton's going to always be at a bit of a disadvantage to Russell, because I guess he just doesn't like that element of the car more so than Russell does. So Mercedes are confident in the near term they're going to be able to bring some things in. Whether they can ever really hope of matching Red Bull this season seems a bit out of reach to me, but still in the short term, they've got their goals, they've got their targets, they say they're making big progress, and we'll see if in Melbourne they can take another small step forward before the big upgrades start to arrive in maybe Baku, but more than likely Imola around about the 6th race of the season. Toto Wolff though isn't frustrated, let's say, with Red Bull. He says, look, we shouldn't talk down what they're achieving, because I remember hearing the same voices between 2014 and 2020. What makes the sport special is that you need to work hard to win, and you deserve it when you do win. He says it's a meritocracy. He says that, look, they've done a better job than us, and therefore they deserve all the victories. And yes, while it can get boring for the fans maybe, that one team's winning all the time, they've earned that, and that's what makes this sport special and different to others, especially when you get a really good season, which this season might not necessarily be. Fernando Alonso, though, is pretty confident they're going to be able to control the Mercedes going forwards, because they've got big upgrades in the works. Aston Martin Martin themselves, they've got more testing and wind tunnel development time than any other team, at least in the front runners, right? They have 100% of the allocation. Red Bull have 63%. Mercedes have like 75, 80%. Ferrari have even less than that after finishing second in the constructors last year. So he reckons like well ahead of the Ferrari, controlling the Mercedes, managed the gap and built the gap over Russell and Hamilton. And he reckons that even they're getting a slight bit closer to Red Bull. So maybe that was circuit specific. But he also reckoned, I believe Alonso made another interview where he says that he does believe at some point this year he's going to be able to get a race win. He said that, you know, it's going to need some help, right, from Red Bull to have some DNFs or crash each other out or something. But he says that at some point that's probably going to happen. And he's pretty confident he can win a race this season, which is pretty exciting stuff for Alonso himself. But very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.